Tonight, a row over transgender people at Prime Minister's questions. Sunak's accused of being offensive, Starmer of political point scoring. It's after the Conservative leader accused Starmer of U-turning on defining a woman. But it happened as the mother of murdered teenager Brianna Ghey was visiting Parliament. The leader of the opposition said the comments were shameful. Tonight, I'll be speaking to Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, as her department puts out analysis claiming Labour's spending plans will lead to tax rises. So are Labour about to dump their £28 billion green spending plans? I've been speaking to the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. And it's the question we all want to know. When will the general election be? Well, the latest speculation is that it can't clash with the US elections. So we'll take a look at some of the other dates that Downing Street might want to avoid. All that and more with Andrew Fisher and Jane Mullerkins, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, if you're already depressed by the Punch and Judy politics of Prime Minister's questions, then I'm really sorry, because today's PMQs is probably one of the worst examples of the genre. While listing apparent U-turns made by Keir Starmer since becoming Labour leader, Rishi Sunak referenced his position on transgender rights and said that he's struggled with defining a woman. While Keir Starmer stood up to reply, of all the weeks to say that with Brianna Ghey's mother in Parliament today, shame. And Brianna Ghey, of course, is the shy 16-year-old stabbed to death by someone she thought was her friend. It's an absolutely gut-wrenching story, and to be honest, it's the kind of story that I really wish was above politics. No one has emerged well from today, apart from perhaps the mother of Brianna Ghey, who's been utterly dignified throughout. First then tonight, let's see what happened in Parliament earlier. Here's Sky's Tamara Cohen.
The brutal murder of trans teenager Brianna Ghey shocked the nation. Today, her mother Esther came to Parliament.
Prime Minister!
Where the Prime Minister made this jibe at Keir Starmer.
Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame, parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility.
Gasps from MPs at that exchange about the definition of a woman, and immediately calls for the Prime Minister to apologise.
And may I take the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister if he will consider apologising to Brianna Ghey's mother for his insensitive comment?
He didn't, but instead said this.
I could just say, also, to Brianna Ghey's mum, to demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that.
Esther Ghey looked shaken as she left the session. Number 10 officials afterwards insisted it was not a transphobic remark and the Prime Minister was making a political point about Keir Starmer changing his position on gender issues. Raw politics, but perhaps without thinking of who was listening. Brianna's dad told Sky News, as the Prime Minister for our country, to come out with degrading comments like he did, regardless of them being in relation to discussions in Parliament, they are absolutely dehumanising. Identities of people should not be used in that manner, and I personally feel shocked by his comments and feel he should apologise for his remarks. Brianna's mother, who met the Labour leader, was in Parliament to attend a debate about mindfulness in schools. She's campaigning to help young people with mental health. Ridiculing each other's records is part of the political knockabout in an election year, but it's heard far beyond this chamber. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
We're joined now by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that's Laura Trott. Thanks for being on the programme. So, should Rishi Sunak apologise to the mother of Brianna Ghey?
Of course, this is an appalling tragedy. And our hearts go out to Brianna's parents. But what the Prime Minister was talking about today was absolutely nothing to do with this case. He was talking at the beginning of PMQs about Labour's record of changing their mind on a number of issues.
I understand that he wasn't directly talking about this case, right? I get that. But at the same time, it's also about being sensitive and respectful. Was it an appropriate thing to say when the mother of a murdered transgender girl is in Parliament?
Did you see the interview with Esther, Brianna's mum, this weekend? I thought that she was incredible. But what she was talking about with relation to this appalling tragedy was the need for reform of social media, was the need for mindfulness.
I am going to talk to you about that later.
Of course, yeah. But
I'm just talking specifically
about...
So you don't think that Rishi Sunak needs to apologise? Is that what you're saying?
I think the point I was making is that she said that she did not want to make it about trans issues. This was not what this was about. And I think we should respect that, and I do. And absolutely, I know that the Prime Minister would never mean to cause anyone upset or harm. He was just talking about Labour and Labour's, U-turning on a number of issues.
So do you think he did anything wrong at PMQs today?
I don't think it was his intention at all to cause any upset or harm.
I'm not talking about intent. Yeah. Do you think he did anything wrong at PMQs?
He wasn't talking about this case.
I know that he's not talking about the case.
And the cases...
Do you think that he did anything wrong at PMQs?
The mother of Brianna said this weekend that it was not to do with trans issues, it's to do with social media.
What do you, Laura Trott, think? Do you think Rishi Sunak did anything wrong at PMQs?
No, I don't.
OK. Brianna's father, Peter Spooner, has told Sky News that the comments were degrading and dehumanising and that Rishi Sunak should apologise. What would you say to him?
I mean, nothing more than I've said already. My heart goes out to Brianna's parents. I cannot imagine what they've gone through. But I know that the Prime Minister just wasn't talking about this case.
Now, OK, let's move on. It's a really upsetting case, and I'm sure, as you say, everyone is going to feel this emotion, this kind of heart-wrenching emotion towards the parents of this poor girl. You've done some analysis on Labour's spending. What's that found?
Yes, so this is about Labour's £28 billion unfunded spending spree, which will result in taxes going up across the country. What we've done today is a Treasury costing of one of the specific bits of that, which their warm home scheme, which they said was going to cost £6 billion a year, and it turns out it's going to be £13 billion a year. Just another bit of evidence that they don't have a plan and they don't know how they're going to pay for it.
It might be means-tested, though. That wasn't taken into consideration, was it?
So what was taken into consideration was what they've said publicly. Now, they may want to change their mind about this now. They've been known to do that in the past a few times about a few other things. But we've taken their public statements, and the civil servants have taken their public statements about the scheme.
Civil servants have taken the public statements.
Yeah.
They're the people who drew this up.
Yep.
Do you think that's an appropriate use of civil servants' time? Because this has effectively been used for party politics, hasn't it?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, it's been done a lot in the past. I remember it being done to us before the 2010 election. But it forces people to be honest about the costings of their policies and to be clear about how much it's going to cost the British people, which people watching at home do want to know.
You're right, it has been done before elections. Normally just before elections. Does this mean that if you're using civil servants' money in that way, it's going to be May?
Well, look, no. Absolutely not. And I should also say that it's caused all kinds of hoo-ha when it's been done directly before elections as well. So I think there's always going to be discussions about this, but I think it is really important that we highlight that Labour has an unfunded spending spree in line. It is much more even than they thought it was going to be, and that is going to result in increases taxes for people at home.
I just wonder if there's a wider point here, right? Because the message from you and the Chancellor is you can't trust Labour with the economy, right? And they're fiscally irresponsible, they're going to raise taxes.
Yeah, and they can't even agree on this plan, right? They're having a row about the £28 billion. It's absurd.
Which we will talk about later as well. But look, I guess that my wider point is, a lot of voters will be thinking, hang on, it's you guys that we can't trust to do what you say. You say Labour will put up taxes. Well, the tax burdens are highest since the early 1980s. You say Labour will be fiscally irresponsible. But at the minute, debt is 100% of GDP. So why should voters trust you on the economy? They'll be looking at your record and think, well, we don't trust you to not put up taxes or not to put up the debt burden either.
Look, we've been through a really difficult time as an economy, and we've made some difficult decisions within that, which you have to do when you're in government, right? We spent £400 billion during COVID, £100 billion on the energy support scheme, and we've had to pay that money back. And yes, as a result of that, we've had to put up taxes on some people. But I know we've discussed before, Sophie, that what we've done is emphasise that that is on people with the broadest shoulders. But now, because of those difficult decisions, because inflation is coming down, because of the hard work of the Bank of England and the government, the economy's turning a corner. And what we're emphasising is this would all be put at risk if we if people at home vote for Labour. So we want to stick with the plan rather than go back to square one.
I want to talk to you a little bit about social media, if I can, and about specifically the use of young people and smartphones. You were talking about the mother of Brianna Ghey. That's obviously one of the things that she wants to address. Now, when you were previously on the show, you told me that you're not on Twitter because you don't want to get death threats, rape threats every day, which, seem pretty fair enough to me. Brianna Ghey's mother says that under 16 shouldn't have access to social media apps. Do you agree with her?
I think it's a really interesting issue. We've just done the Online Safety Act, which has gone a long way, actually, in making sure that children won't be able to access social media sites. Up to now, you'll know, there's actually age limits on a lot of social media sites. When I do school visits in my own constituency, I actually often ask them to put up their hands if they're on Snapchat or, TikTok. They always all are. So what we're doing, I think, will be a really important step forward. That's just being implemented now. But absolutely, do I think that we should look at what more we can do with this, as we talked about at the beginning, this absolutely appalling tragedy? Of course we should.
I mean, your colleague Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP, wants to go further. She wants under 16s to be banned from having smartphones. Do you think that's right?
I think Miriam's been really brilliant on this issue in general. She campaigned a lot on the issue of porn and young people's access to porn, which is one of the things that we've talked about in the Online Safety Act. I think, look, as I said, this is something where I know everyone at home, all the parents are really worried about it. My kids are too young to be on this now, but it would be really nice if we knew that the internet was a safer space for them. So we should look at everything. But as I said, we've got a really big change which is coming through at the moment, and we should see what impact that will have.
But where are your instincts? Do you think that we should have a bit more regulation and banning social media apps on phones or whatever it is?
My instincts definitely are to more regulation, and that's exactly what is being done now.
You see, one thing that lots of parents might argue, I guess, is the bare minimum would be banning smartphones in schools. But the Department for Education, well, they're just consulting on it, aren't they? They're looking at putting out guidance. I mean, that doesn't seem that much, does it?
Well, schools can do this now. We've put forward guidance that schools can do this now if they want to. I think we're looking at whether we need to kind of go further on that and what more we should do. It's complicated, obviously, because, it puts schools in a position where they're having to potentially search pupils on the way in. There's lots of issues that we need to think about. But some schools have done this and done this very effectively. So it's learning from that and looking at what we can put in place to potentially make this stricter.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Laura Trott, their Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Well, as we were just saying, for weeks now, there has been speculation about Labour's plans to invest £28 billion in green jobs and industry. And there's been talk that there are some divides in the Shadow Cabinet about junking the policy as well. Well, in the last few minutes here at Sky News, we've been told that Labour is set to make an announcement on its Green Prosperity Plan. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins us now. So, what's going on?
The waiting is over, and my goodness, Sophie, we have waited a very long time. Tomorrow, Keir Starmer will announce changes to what used to be known as the £28 billion Green Prosperity Plan. Now, this plan has been kicking around for a couple of years. It was meant to be £28 billion of investment in different bits of green infrastructure, green jobs, green insulation to make people's homes warmer, but has ended up being a millstone round the Labour leader and the Shadow Chancellor's neck because it has allowed the Conservative Party to say that this means that they're going to do more borrowing and potentially more taxes in order to fund it. So tomorrow there will be an overhaul. It is, in fact, the fourth time this plan has been overhauled because, first of all, it was pushed back to the second half of the Parliament, then it was subject to fiscal rules, and then it took into account various bits of existing government spending, all of which reduced the amount that was going to be spent. But now I think Labour strategists think it needs to go further. Now, there's been a fight in public for ages about that, with lots of Shadow Cabinet ministers making clear that they were running away from the figure. But only yesterday, Keir Starmer seemed to be hugging it close. Watch this.
We're going to need investment. That's where the 28 billion comes in, that investment that's desperately needed for that mission. And I've been unwavering in relation to the mission.
So what's going to change, Sam?
So, well, we told you this was coming this week in the Politics and Jack and Sam's podcast at the weekend. And what we said then, and I think it still holds true tonight, is that what's likely to change is that individual aspects of the plan will be scaled back. Now, actually, the thing that the Tories were talking about today, that plan to spend £6 billion if you believe Labour, £13 billion if you believe the Tories on home insulation. Well, it looks as if that's actually going to have the axe taken to it. I don't quite know what's going to replace it. But more importantly, I think the big picture of what Labour's going to do is to stop talking about that figure that hasn't even been the figure for quite a long time, and to instead refocus this on a series of individual plans like investment in battery factories and talk about outcomes, not the amount that you're going to spend. But also, I think they're going to make a huge thing of the fact that private companies are going to want to do this too. It's not all just public money. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were private companies coming out tomorrow and going, well, if the government's putting that in this much, I'll match that or put in more. And so we'll fund some of the plans that Labour want to do. So they'll try and make it into a big deal to obscure the fact it is yet another Keir Starmer U-turn.
Another prediction correct on the podcast.
Thank you.
Getting to be essential viewing there. Just a few minutes ago, and it was before we heard this latest news that Sam's just given us, I should explain. I spoke to the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. I started by asking him about that £28 billion pledge. Listen to just his tone and how enthusiastic he was about it. You can kind of get the direction of travel, I think. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening. So if Labour wins the election, are you going to be spending £28 billion a year by the end of the Parliament on your green commitments?
Well, the ambition is to ramp up to £28 billion. The challenge we've got with this and with all of our other priorities and the policies that we're costing up and thinking about for our manifesto is the state of the public finances, the state of the economy, which is so much worse than I think any incoming government would inherit for generations, a far bigger challenge than we had in 1997. And that's why, across the board, we're having to make some difficult choices because we need to make sure that the manifesto we set is fully costed, fully funded, with promises we can keep.
So are you going to be spending £28 billion a year on your green plans by the end of the Parliament?
Well, that's the ambition, because...
And what does that mean?
Well, because it means...
I can have an ambition to be Taylor Swift or, to be in the England cricket team. Doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Well, it's never too late, Sophie, but there's a serious point
I think it is too late, I'll be honest.
There's a serious point. Shake it off. There's a serious point here, which is the ambition is to get to clean power by 2030. And the reason we've set that as a mission for the next Labour government...
It's a lovely
No, but hang on, just hear me out here, because this is ultimately about Britain's national interests and what is value for money. And we could continue to do the same short-term sticking plaster politics of the Conservatives, which have left us with higher bills, energy insecurity, prone to what's happening with global markets, and missing out on the race for green jobs in clean power. Or we can have the ambition, as we have, to say, actually, if we accelerate our progress to get more of those clean, green jobs in our country, we can re-industrialise parts of the country that have suffered, cut bills and give Britain its energy security back.
When Chris Bryant was asked this question this morning by Kay Burley, he said, we are doing it, it will be £28 billion. You're not saying that, are you?
No, I'm saying what Keir said and what the rest of the team has said,
what Chris Bryant
which is
said.
Ramping up to £28 billion. And what I think we've
by the end of the Parliament?
What we've acknowledged is that since Rachel Reeves first made that speech to Labour conference, a hell of a lot has changed in the economy, not least because of the catastrophic misjudgments made by Liz Truss with that disastrous mini-budget.
OK, so if Ed Miliband's over here, loves the £28 billion green policy, Rachel Reeves is like, oh, I'm worried about the finances. Where are you in this scale?
Well, hang on a minute. Before we all sort of start moaning about, the mean-spirited Shadow Chancellor, we're united on this.
So you're more like Rachel Reeves,
We
then?
all know, we are all as a Shadow Cabinet united on this, because we know that the catastrophic mismanagement of the public finances has been a disaster for family finances through rising rents, rising mortgages, rising bills. And so underpinning all of our priorities and all of our policies has got to be that fiscal discipline, the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has set out, and we are all signed up on. So I'm not going to sort of join in this idea. I mean, I joke sometimes about Rachel Reeves, and she is tougher with us in private than even she is in public. That's her job as the Shadow Chancellor. But it's also why people trust her as an effective steward of the public finances, why when they compare her to Jeremy Hunt and the chancellors that have been before Jeremy Hunt as Chancellors of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves is far more qualified. She's a former economist at the Bank of England.
And she says you can't do £28 billion a year,
and
that's good enough for you.
As we all know, that if you don't have fiscal discipline, you can't deliver your promises, but but also you can't improve the cost of living and the family finances too. And that's why it's got to underpin everything else.
You're Shadow Health Secretary. You're talking about not having enough doctors, not enough dentists. But you'd quite like £28 billion a year to spend on the NHS?
Well, I'd never say no, but also there's a serious point here as well, Sophie, in that when I've spoken to Rachel about the pressures on the NHS, I've had to do that, as everyone else has, against that backdrop of bleak public finances. I've also done it with a recognition, by the way, that we need to think more carefully about how the NHS spends the money it already has. Because people can't get a GP appointment or a dentist appointment, a GP appointment, for example, costs 40 quid, they end up in A&E, which costs £400. So it's worse for patients and worse for the taxpayer, which is why, as part of the reform agenda, I want to shift the focus of and the centre of gravity of the NHS out of hospital into the community, because it's better for patients and better value for taxpayers.
You want to reform dentist contracts in particular. You've been out visiting people in Bristol today who have these long waits to see an NHS dentist. What exactly do you want to do?
Well, it's not always about money in NHS reform, and I've been pretty blunt about making that case. In dentistry, though, a lot of it is about money, and the reason why so many have handed back their contracts is because it just doesn't pay. And do you know what really sticks in the craw is that last year we had a £400 million underspend in the NHS dentistry budget, despite the fact there are people literally queuing around the block in Bristol, where I was this morning, talking to people and listening to their heartbreaking stories about the damage this has done. And what the Health Secretary did today was take a whole range of measures from Labour's emergency dentistry plan, so I'm not going to knock her for that, but she didn't adopt the argument we were making about reform of the contracts. And actually what she said is, I'll do that in 2025. Well, firstly, big assumption you're going to be in government, Victoria Atkins. But secondly, your party promised this in 2010. Why would people believe that a broken promise in 2010, 15, 17 and 19 would now be delivered with an unprecedented fifth term of Conservative government? Who are they trying to kid?
So on your own, because I'm keen to talk about, take you seriously, you're the guy who wants to be Health Secretary after the election. What do you want to do to NHS dentist contracts? Are you effectively saying that right now, too many dentists are going through university, perhaps getting subsidised training, and then going to earn money in the private sector? Should they be effectively encouraged, forced to work longer in the NHS?
Well, and to be fair to the government, we've made that argument. To be fair to the government, that they've adopted that today, and we want them to get the consultation on that done as quickly as possible, because I think that would be a sensible change. But we do have to address the funding of the contract as well, and that's why I've said...
So pay more money for NHS treatments.
And look at the underspends that we've had year after year after year in dentistry, which have then been sucked off and into secondary care, which means that patients don't get the support and the care they need, the treatment they need up front in the community, in dentistry practices. So they end up in hospital, worse for them and more expensive for the taxpayer. And I've said, look, this is so urgent that week one of a Labour government, the Monday after the general election, I'm going to get the British Dental Association into the Department of Health, if I'm the Secretary of State and we've won the election, say, OK, let's agree now the process for contract negotiation, let's get the ball rolling immediately, because it's that urgent. This lot have been in for 14 years, and having broken their manifesto commitment over 4 general elections now, they're expecting the country to say, do you know what? Well, let's have the triumph of hope over bitter experience and give the Tories an unprecedented fifth term. That is a disaster. That would be the risk the country can't afford, a fifth term of Conservative government that would run NHS dentistry down further and continue with the mismanaged decline of the NHS. And if we're not careful, what we see in dentistry now, which is people forced to go private and the NHS is a poor service for poor people, that's the future for the NHS. That's the future we can't risk with the Tories.
Now, I don't want to spend too long on this, because in some ways I think the whole thing is pretty unedifying. But you'll know what I'm talking about. The moment at Prime Minister's Questions today, where Rishi Sunak made a comment about Keir Starmer's record on transgenderism in front of the parents of Brianna Ghey, who was transgender. She was, of course, killed. Now, Kemi Badenoch's come back to say, the Culture Secretary, every murder is a tragedy. None should be trivialised by political point scoring. As a mother, I can imagine the trauma that Esther Ghey has endured. It was shameful of Starmer to link his own inability to be clear on the matter of sex and gender directly to her grief, and then saying that his behaviour today shows Labour are happy to weaponise this issue when it suits them.
I think I'd say 2 things. Firstly, Kemi Badenoch should listen to decent Conservative MPs like Deanna Davison, who's spoken out this afternoon, who I think recognised that what the Prime Minister was guilty of this afternoon was of using a minority in our country, a small minority, which is trans people, who are at the wrong end of all of the statistics on hate crime, as a political punchline. And I think that was particularly irresponsive. It was obviously insensitive, given that Esther Ghey was in the chamber today. But even if she hadn't been, it's still irresponsible. And particularly in an election year, I think we as politicians have a responsibility to conduct our debate and our conversations in a more respectful way on this and other issues. And that's what I think Rishi Sunak didn't do today. The thing I also think the Conservative Party has been guilty of, and where I think Kemi's got some brass neck, frankly, they have deliberately stoked culture wars in the hope that every minute of airtime we spend talking about this is a minute of airtime we're not talking about the cost of living crisis or the crisis in the NHS or all of the other issues the Conservatives have failed on. And if Rishi Sunak thinks he's going to win the election because people will be distracted by culture wars and will therefore forget the Conservatives' appalling record, I think he's in for a real shock. But we're not going to engage in this culture war.
OK.
And I see it as our responsibility to put the fire out the Tories have started.
Just finally, while we have you, the King this week diagnosed with cancer. That was made public by Buckingham Palace. And I guess, you know, that's something that you will understand more than most.
Yeah, I've been there myself with kidney cancer. And a couple of things went through my mind the other day beyond obvious shock and sympathy for what the King's going through, which is a cancer diagnosis comes as a really awful shock, whoever you are. It doesn't matter if you are one of the most famous and wealthy people in the country or whether you are one of the poorest people in the country. And the second thing is, thinking about my own experience, I think it was almost harder for my family than it was for me. My prognosis was good. I always knew what was happening to me. And I think for my family, there was that sense of helplessness that, again, despite being the royal family, they're still a family. They're still people with feelings like the rest of us. And I've been a bit uncomfortable, actually, in the days that followed the announcement, of some of the commentary and people saying, well, I think we should know what sort of cancer it is. Or, oh, look, oh, here's the King coming and going from the palace. Or, look, the first images emerge. And I think he might be the King, but he's a human being with a family. And I think they deserve a bit more privacy, actually. And he needs space to go through that treatment. His family needs space to support him. I know they're still going to be doing their public duties and doing their duty. That's what the royal family does. But we shouldn't forget that there are human beings at the centre of this. And I'm sure every family who's been touched by cancer, bearing in mind 1 in 2 of us will have had it, and everyone knows someone they love who's been affected by cancer. Let's keep that in mind when we think about the royal family, just as we would any other family.
Wes Streeting, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Wes Streeting there. Well, you're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, it looks like your Labour will be abandoning its Green pledge for £28 billion. Will it cost the party votes? We'll debate with our guests, the former Labour Director of Policy under Jeremy Corbyn, Andrew Fisher, and the Times Magazine Associate Editor, Jane Mullerkins.
A lot of action going on. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the President and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, is back-breaking work. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the big developing story tonight is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected a ceasefire deal with Hamas, saying negotiations with the group were not going anywhere and that the proposed terms from Hamas were bizarre. Instead, he said that total victory is possible in Gaza within months. Well, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel for talks on the proposed prisoner swap deal. We're expecting to hear from him at a news conference shortly in Tel Aviv. And when that happens, of course, we will bring it to you live. In the meantime, though, we can bring in our duo for tonight, Andrew Fisher, columnist and former director of policy to the Labour Party, and the columnist and broadcaster, that's Jane Kerrins. Great to have you here. Firstly, I just want to talk to you about the political breaking news today. It feels like tomorrow, Keir Starmer, as our deputy political editor explained earlier, is about to effectively junk the £28 billion a year green spending pledge. Andrew, is that a good move?
No, it's a really bad move, and it's bad for the country, it's bad for people's finances, it's bad for our energy security. Look, this is about investing to grow the economy. I mean, the number one political aim of the number one mission of Keir Starmer is the highest sustained growth in the G7. How do you get growth? Listen to the IFS, independent experts like that. It's investment. That's where we lag behind the rest of the world. We're behind on renewable energy, so we've got better energy security in this country, cheaper renewable energy, insulating people's homes to reduce their bills. This is good stuff that creates jobs. And if we're not doing that, it's economically illiterate, actually. This isn't about raising taxes, this is about borrowing to invest, in the same way that people borrow to invest in a home so that they reduce their housing costs over the long term and have an asset at the end of it. So this is a really, really bad move. And to be honest, it just looks really weak and like they don't know what they're saying. You know, this was announced to great fanfare in 2021, and it's been downgraded time and time again from being 28 billion of additional funding to 28 billion, including whatever the Tories are doing, to being each year and every year, to being maybe by the end of a parliament, from a pledge to an ambition. So it looks really politically like a mess. But the bigger story is it's economically bad news for the country, for people's jobs, for people's bills.
It feels like it's been kind of the longest, most kind of torturous junking of a policy that we've seen. I guess the difficulty they've had as well is that, you know, we saw it with Laura Trott. You know, the Conservatives see this as a real attack line, don't they, rightly or wrongly, on Labour. Jane, I don't know what your sort of take is on this all.
Well, I agree. I think that the kind of consistent attempts by the Tories to paint Labour as fiscally irresponsible and a very risky election possibility, unfortunately, this plays right into their hands. Because I actually don't think that most younger voters, and I'm going to boldly include myself in that, but most people who don't remember the 1970s don't necessarily have this long-standing association with Labour as a bad economic risk. I think they see current and recently previous governments as just as bad an economic risk. But unfortunately, junking a bill like this is going to play right into their hands.
I absolutely love the definition of being young, by the way, not being able to remember the 70s. I'm very on board with that, for sure. I want to talk to you a bit about the PMQs row as well, because Laura Trott, sitting here, and after a bit of pushing from me, she said that she didn't think Rishi Sunak did anything wrong at PMQs today. I don't know what your take is on this, Andrew. It's a really hard issue.
Look, I think all politicians have been playing a really... All the ones that have used this as some sort of political football, and some in the media as well. Look, we're talking about people's human rights and where they sit and how they can be balanced and accommodated within public services. Those are serious discussions and practical discussions to have. They're not a political punchline. They're not a football for people to use, and whipping up, kind of hatred against people around this issue, I think is grotesque, to be frank, and it's a really dangerous thing to do. And we've seen the consequences of that. We see it in all the statistics on hate crime against trans people. And to be honest, you look at this government, it can't run anything right in the economy, but what it can do very accurately is find a scapegoat, whether that's trans people, whether it's asylum seekers. They can always find somebody to blame, somebody who can be their punch bag, a distraction when they can't sort out the NHS, the economy, people's living standards, dentistry. You could go through a list for an hour, so I won't. But, they've always got a scapegoat instead, and that's pathetic, frankly.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I know I sort of feel a bit sort of conflicted almost about talking too much about the story as well. Because, at the heart of it is Brianna and what happened to her. And it is just the most awful sort of case. It's really sort of stayed with me, actually, reading what happened. Jane, what's your take?
Yeah, I think I'd like to caveat what I'm about to say by saying that I think everybody behaved pretty badly in Parliament today, apart from Brianna Ghey's mother, who, as you said earlier, was completely dignified. I do think that Rishi Sunak made an error today by going ahead with a pre-scripted gag that used trans people in a dig at the opposition leader. And I think he already knew that Brianna Ghey's mother was in Parliament that day, and I think that was a miscalculation on his part to go ahead with it. However, I also think the Labour Party have used it and capitalised on it today in a way that is quite unseemly. But I think, unfortunately, it did make the Prime Minister look insensitive and callous, coming 48 hours off the back of making a bet on Talk TV about migrants on planes, which also made him look not very sensitive and I think was also spectacularly ill-judged. And perhaps he wasn't expecting it. I think we can all agree on that. But I think in combination, the two of those things coming 48 hours apart don't paint the Conservatives as a passionate political party at all. And, that's something they've historically struggled with too. And this isn't helping.
Is there a kind of political naivety here, do you think, as well? It's almost like...
No, I think this is part of a very clear political strategy, which is try and blame other things. The whole Rwanda gimmick is about focus on people coming in small boats as if they're the biggest problem facing the country. And all the opinion polls tell us people don't buy it. They're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about their energy bills. They're worried about housing, about the NHS, being able to get a dentist. Those are the things that concern people. And until they address those things, the Tories can try and distract us as much as they like. They will be where they are in the polls, and deservedly so. OK, thanks both very much for a really interesting discussion. We'll have lots more from Andrew and Jane later on as well. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, Prince William is back to royal duties and due to speak later this evening with an update on his father's condition. We'll have the details. That's next.
Hello, welcome back. Well, we're waiting for a news conference from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's in Tel Aviv for talks on the proposed prisoner swap deal. When that happens, when he appears at that lectern, we'll bring it to you live. But now, though, an update on royal news, because in the next hour, Prince William is due to speak at an event in central London. He's expected to refer to his father's cancer diagnosis, as well as the Princess of Wales's condition too. Sky's royal correspondent Laura Trott joins us now. Laura, what are we expecting?
Evening. Well, Prince William has now arrived at this evening engagement, not on his own inside. He's there with Tom Cruise. Just to warn you, the pictures of him arriving do contain some flash photography, but if you have a listen, you might be able to hear what he had to say to the crowds outside. He was asked as he walked in to the hotel here how he was responding to the messages of support coming in for his father. He said, "We really appreciate everyone's kind messages. Thank you." And you can see there as he walked his way into the hotel. He is now back at work after just over 3 weeks off. He'd taken time off following the Princess of Wales abdominal surgery. She was in hospital for 2 weeks. He'd paused and postponed all his engagements while she was in hospital to help support her and their 3 children, and while she was settling back at home as well. But today was the first time we've seen him since then, and of course the first time since his father's cancer diagnosis. He's here at a gala for London's Air Ambulance charity. That's something very close to his heart. Obviously, he was a pilot with the East Anglian team a while back, but he is here inside. Tom Cruise is in there with him as well. And there's a lot of pressure now, I think, on Prince William since the King's diagnosis, and this is something he will be aware of as he returns to work and returns to his royal duties. He's due to give a speech in the coming minutes as well. We'll bring you more of that a little later too.
Thanks very much, Laura. And as Laura says, we will bring you that speech from Prince William when it's made. Let's bring in Andrew and Jane, shall we? Jane, it's been such a huge moment, hasn't it, with the King revealing his cancer diagnosis and giving us that information, choosing to share it. And of course, all eyes now on how the family's reacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a really interesting week in looking at how Charles handles these kind of big crises. And I think the interaction with Harry coming for 24 hours and only spending half an hour with his father really shows, I think, one of the gulfs between their generations and the way that they are handling these things. And perhaps maybe one of the reasons the rift doesn't seem to be healing. You know, Charles is... He's having a phone call with Rishi Sunak tonight. It's been very stoic. It's been, you know, stiff upper lip, not even giving us the details of what the exact cancer diagnosis is, you know, what sort of cancer. This very kind of almost an overhang from a previous generation of sort of keep calm, carry on stoicism. And then you have Harry, who obviously, you know, let's not forget, only a year ago released Spare and, you know, all its many brickbats of his own family. And I think it's just, it shows the very different generational styles of the sort of, you know, Oprah Winfrey, soul-bearing, mental health challenges, openness. And I think possibly in all families, perhaps that's a bit of a rift as well. You've got someone who wants everyone to go to family therapy together and someone who wants people to stop talking so much about their feelings. And I think that's really been evident this week in the way that the King has conducted himself and perhaps, you know, the way that Harry's flown in and out, and who knows what happened in that half-hour discussion, but he's gone.
It's quite sad that, you know, seeing him and William, you know, not getting together as well. I guess there is a, you know, if we're going to try and find something positive to come out of, you know, the King's diagnosis, the fact that he has been open about it, you know, as Jane was saying, you know, there is a sort of stoicism, he hasn't been giving too many details, but that is going to hopefully help people, you know, raise awareness of making sure that they get checked, that they look after themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably help if he did give a bit more details, because there are different checks for different types of cancer, obviously, and look, everyone can relate to that. You know, very many people, sadly, can relate to that within their own families, and of course it's tough. But I think as well, you know, I find it, I'm not accusing you, Jane, of doing this at all, but you've seen some of the stuff in the press of attacking Harry, of he wasn't there quick enough, didn't stay long enough. I mean, look, we don't know how serious this is. It might be he's having fairly routine surgery and he just, you know, flew in, checked on him, like, yeah, good, you're all right, Dad, I just wanted to check. And and then went back to his life, which is now in the US with his own family. And we shouldn't forget, this was a child who lost his mother at a very young age, traumatised by that, had to grieve in the public domain, had to, clearly was unhappy about the way the royal family as an institution reacted to that and other things in his life, saw his own wife being hounded in similar ways he thought to how his mother was, and wanted to get them out of that. And I've got some sympathy for him on a human level around that. And I think you're right, there is a generational divide about being open. I think it's really healthy that somebody like Prince Harry has been open about their mental health crises, as have many other people in the public eye as well, because it does help others to talk about those things. And that, my generation, I'm a Generation X, we weren't good and brought up to talk about our emotions, especially men. I think there is that kind of stoicism amongst men. There's a gendered aspect to this as well, which I think is negative, and that's helped break down those boundaries as well. So that's a positive.
And I think if we're all honest, I don't think any of us would like that much scrutiny of any of our families, to be honest. No. It sounds like a complete nightmare. Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Just when will Rishi Sunak call the election? Talk of working assumptions, civil service access talks, and let's face it, some real difficulty planning your holidays if you're a political journalist. Not that we're moaning, we are talking election timing after the break.
So let me introduce you to Daniel Fairbrother. Tell me all about it. Turn around first of all, let me see the fridge.
Yes, so this is Tallulah, my fridge.
There she is. And tell us why she's called Tallulah.
So Tallulah is named after Cool Runnings, one of my favourite films growing up.
It's the rig, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, they famously named their bobsleigh Tallulah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a bit of fun to play on words. And yeah, I've called her Tallulah, and she's currently the second lady in my life at the moment. So my best friend Sam, he's type 1 diabetic. Last year I tried to take on a challenge for him to raise some money for Diabetes UK. It didn't go as planned, and that frustrated me. So I said to him, look, I'm going to come up with a bigger and better idea. And I heard about a world record for the London Marathon for fastest marathon run with a fridge. And I thought I could do that. Why, I don't know, but I just know that it's something I can achieve. And thankfully, it's going well and it's attracted a lot of attention. The biggest issue is the additional weight to my body. My legs at the moment are struggling, they're feeling it. I have to have a very different running style, so I'm sort of hunched over, everything against that you want to do when you're running. It doesn't help with your breathing. Windy days aren't fun. I'm like a lorry on the motorway being blown about. Yeah. So there's lots of challenges, but the biggest one is weight at the moment. There's a metal frame that runs down my back underneath the fridge, and it's strapped fairly well to Tallulah on there. As long as I can get the straps tight on the fridge, on the backpack, sorry, the fridge is pretty good and it sort of sticks with me. But it's been a learning curve being able to run with the fridge because, like you say, it's not normal at all. I'm hoping to raise £10,000 for Diabetes UK. I do have a Just Giving page set up.
Tell us.
If you want to have a look, it's Just Giving Daniel Fairbrother, which is my name. My story will come up, all my runs are logged on there. So the record stands at 4 hours, 52 minutes and 10 seconds.
I couldn't do that without a fridge.
Yeah. I'm training to do it in 4.5 hours.
OK, and how's the training going?
It's going really well, thank you. I did a half marathon at the weekend. That's the longest I've run so far. That was really positive. I do train with a lot of hill sections involved. So I'm hoping that will help pay off on the flat roads of London. It's a standard fridge. It's got all the shelves in there, so it's completely standard.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, it has been a pretty busy political day. We've been talking a lot about PMQs, and of course we just heard from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, who told me that she didn't think that Rishi Sunak did anything wrong at PMQs when he was referencing Keir Starmer's, as they would put it, U-turns on the transgender row there. Well, let's go now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. You've got a bit more detail on what actually unfolded.
I'm really struck, Sophie, talking to people in and around Rishi Sunak's team, just what a disaster today has been. They had been working for months on this plan to change the subject back to Labour's 28 billion, to do these costings, and they thought internally it was going to be a really big day, a reset day that pivoted the whole conversation back in their favour, and they had done a lot of work on it. And the big problem for Rishi Sunak today is that he personally messed it up with what happened at PMQs. Now, I understand internally in Downing Street, he's telling people that he just didn't hear Keir Starmer mention that Brianna's mother was in the gallery, and that's why he did what he did. But there was a discussion after Prime Minister's question time about whether or not he should apologise. It wasn't decided, but there was some people were advocating that. But then suddenly, Kemi Badenoch came in and announced she was writing a whole series of social media posts that were going to attack Keir Starmer, double down, and that completely took away any freedom of Number 10 to do what they were thinking of doing and apologising. Effectively, you had the spectre of the Prime Minister being bullied by one of his cabinet members and having his options cut off. That is an extraordinary position for a Prime Minister to be in. This was meant to be a good news day. He personally messes it up, and then his cabinet ministers box him in. I just think it's worth taking a moment to appreciate just where that leaves people in the Tory party, Tory MPs, as they try to evaluate where to go next. The mood is really grim around him tonight.
Thank you very much. Sam Coates there giving us some more detail about the day that Rishi Sunak has had. Thank you very much indeed. Well, here are 5 major events that Downing Street might be bearing in mind when deciding when to hold this year's election. We've been talking about the election and whether the date of the election has changed. This all comes from a story where, apparently, according to The Sun, Rishi Sunak was shifting the date that he was going to hold the election from November because of the clash with the US election back to October. So we thought we would talk a little bit about some other dates that he might be trying to change. We've got the Paris Olympics, the local elections, Euro 2024, the US election, and Wimbledon. So let's bring in our panel for the night, shall we? Right, this is Jane and Andrew. We thought at the end we'd have a little bit of fun, right, to try and work out just how hot you are on some of the events that are coming up in the next year that Rishi Sunak may be trying to avoid as well, just like at the US election. So the ones that we've got, as we were saying, Paris Olympics, local elections, Euro 2024, the US election, and Wimbledon. Can you work out when the earliest, what the first thing to happen this year is going to be out of those things?
Local elections.
Local elections. May, very good. That is the 2nd of May. Yeah. Right, what's next then? What comes next?
Wimbledon.
So next we've got...
The Euros, maybe, start.
I'm going to go Wimbledon.
Ooh.
I'm going Wimbledon.
I'm going to say the Euros start first, and then they overlap and carry on through Wimbledon.
Do we both get a point?
You know what? It's Euros the first. Sorry, Jane. I have to say, that felt like some pretty expert sporting knowledge there. Actually, you'll find it overlaps. Have you planned your summer holidays around these events?
I haven't looked at the exact dates. I just know from previous experience. I'm afraid I've been around long enough to cope with this clash before.
I love it. Yeah, Euro 2024. So they kick off on 14th of June for a month. The Foreign Office just publishing guidance warning that 500,000 Brits are expected to travel to Germany. That beer is often stronger there, so you should be very, very careful how much you drink, which I'm sure that all football fans travelling to the Euros are going to be very well aware of. Half pints, guys, OK? Half pints. Right, then we have got Wimbledon, so you were pretty close. 1st of July. Big Wimbledon fan?
I mean, I enjoy it. I'm better at watching than I'm at playing tennis. So...
Everyone enjoys Wimbledon, right?
Absolutely.
This is very fair. Then we got, after that, the Summer of Sport continuing with the Paris Olympics. That's right. I've actually just got a couple of tickets to the Olympics. I'm very excited. I think I've only just realised that it's, just pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah, literally, and in terms of time.
Exactly.
If you need guests on Politics Hub
Absolutely.
from Paris, we're happy to go.
If you'd like us to be the panel in Paris.
I quite like that.
Yeah.
I love the Olympics. Quite excited. Summer of Sport continuing there with the Paris Olympics. The world descending there from the 26th of July, and then finally it is the US election. When's America heading to the polls?
5th of November.
Very good. Bonus points for anyone who got that. America heading to the polls on the 5th of November. Right, guys. So, when do you reckon the election's going to be? If you're going to have to... The UK election, I should say.
Well, I do think it's a very salient point that it would be best to avoid the US elections. I was living in the US during the 2016 and the 2020 elections, and the toxicity and the noise that Trump creates in an election I don't think there's any way that we wouldn't be susceptible to that noise affecting an election here. I think it would be impossible not to be swayed by it. And I think the security risks are real as well if Trump does win. So I think it would be wise to try and get ours out of the way. I mean, I think anyone who works in news would like to go as early as possible because it feels like we're already in an election. And I think everyone would be like, can you just do it on May the 2nd? And then everyone can get on with their lives for the rest of the year. But, you know, Times Radio, where I do a lot of work, are the election station. And it's basically going to be 9 months of electioneering, which is...
Yeah, we feel like that too, right?
You can't book a
we're
holiday.
basically gearing up for a whole year of, like, you know, super politics, like, almost, aren't we? Well, what's your take? When do you think it's
I think he'll go as long as possible because look at the polling. You know, they're 15, 20 points behind. He doesn't want to call an election soon because they're going to lose heavily. So he needs something to turn up. Hopefully the economy turn around, the NHS waiting list go down. I mean, none of that's going to happen, really. So I think he'll try and do it in September because then he'll cancel Tory party conference to do it. That's good for him because there'd be loads of splits, loads of people jockeying for position. That would actually be quite helpful. Whereas if he goes after that, when they've had an abysmal conference again, that will look really bad. So I suspect that's probably the sweet spot and it avoids all of the other sporting events.
There you go. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you both very much indeed for a very lively panel. Lots of different chats tonight, so that was great. Thanks, Jane and Andrew. Now, I did want to bring you some breaking news before we leave you tonight. Brianna Ghey's family had been invited to meet with Rishi Sunak and also with the Technology Secretary, Michelle Donnellan. Now, that is about online safety. We know, of course, that Brianna's mother has been talking about access to social media for under 16, so I'm sure that will be part of that discussion. And, of course, that coming after Rishi Sunak's comments at PMQs. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight.
It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Abusers in the ambulance service. Sky News investigates a toxic culture